Welcome to the Addiction and Co-occurring Disorders Treatment Manual video series. In this video, we're going to be talking about stages of readiness for change. The goal of this video is to help you learn about the stages of change and how to increase motivation and momentum. So once you get started, you just keep going and you don't feel like it's difficult and drudgery every single day. Readiness is a combination of motivation, willingness, and ability. You may be motivated, but if you don't have the ability or you're not willing to actually do it, then you're not going to be able to change. You will go through a series of stages as you begin to think about, begin, and maintain your new behaviors. And it's important to remember that you have different levels of motivation for every desired change or action. You remember in the last video, we talked about the different types of motivation and how they may be different for every single objective, every single thing on your treatment plan. And you just need to recognize that and do your best to enhance your motivation for every single behavior. Pre-contemplation is the first phase of readiness for change. When somebody's in pre-contemplation, it's like being on the side of a pool on a hot day. You don't feel too hot yet. You're sunbathing. You're not going into that cold pool. There is no need to. In pre-contemplation, people don't intend to change. They tend to minimize, rationalize, and deny that there's a problem. There are different types of pre-contemplators, and these types are based on why they are not willing to change or willing to acknowledge that there's a problem. The first type is called a reluctant pre-contemplator, and reluctant pre-contemplators don't have sufficient knowledge about the problem or don't realize the personal impact that the problem is actually having. So it's going to be important if you're sitting there going, everybody keeps telling me I need to go to treatment, but I don't think I've got a problem. Okay, well, explore the impact that the problem is having. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe you're wrong. But until you start exploring the fact, you're not going to know. It's also important during this period to explore recovery options. You know, what could you do if you decide that there might be a problem? What are some steps that you might be able to take? Does it mean going into residential treatment right away? No. There are a lot of other options. So during this time, figure out how much of an impact that your behaviors are having, that the problem is having, and what options do you have in order to address any negative impacts. Before you go any further, stop and in your journal, identify how your addiction or your mental health issues are impacting your health, your mental health, and your relationships. The next type of pre-contemplator is a rebellious pre-contemplator. And people who fall into this category are afraid of losing control over their lives. One of the things they hate most in the world, and with everything, not just recovery, is for people to tell them what to do. A lot of people who are rebellious pre-contemplators have lost control in the past or have had control taken from them in the past. So they place a premium on feeling like they are in control of their lives. It's important if you fall into this category, you're like, oh yeah, I hate when people tell me what to do. Recognize you may have had times in the past when you felt powerless. You may have experienced trauma and you're afraid if you start feeling feelings, you're going to get overwhelmed and you're going to lose control of your feelings. It's going to be important at this stage to shift energy into making positive choices rather than rebelling. Instead of being angry and being willing to fight and going, you can't tell me what to do. I dare you to come try, tell me what to do. take that energy and say, okay, how can I switch this into positive choices? How can I look at what's going on, get a better understanding of how it's impacting me, and start making choices, or at least identifying options of things I could do to have a happier, healthier life. If this sounds like you, take some time to think about what is making you feel forced into recovery or treatment, or who is making you feel forced into recovery or treatment, and identify what parts of that situation you have control over and what they or the situation can or cannot do. If you are on probation, or you're on a plan through the Department of Children and Families or something, you may have a case plan that says you have to abstain from certain behaviors or you have to do certain things. But those things will end. You will get off probation. You'll have your case plan closed. They will end. There is light at the end of the tunnel. You may have to do some things right now that you'd rather not do. However, those things will end. You also have the option of just not following your case plan. Now, that will result in some potentially negative consequences, but you have the choice of how you're going to behave. The next thing I want you to think about is, what are you afraid will happen if you are not in control? What are you afraid will happen if you admit that, yeah, there might be a problem here that's a little bit bigger than me? Once you identify what you're afraid of, then it's going to be important to figure out how to deal with that. And that is what a sponsor or a counselor or a coach or a spiritual leader might be able to help you with. The next question is, how can you keep yourself safe? If you're afraid that as soon as you start feeling feelings, it is going to feel, you are going to feel completely out of control, how can you keep yourself safe? What things can you do? Remember, you have the choice. You have the ability to control how deeply and how quickly you start exposing some of your issues. So recognizing what parts of this process that you do have control over is going to be really important. And finally, how can you make the best out of this situation? If you have to be here, your boss said you have to, your lawyer said you have to, your caseworker said you have to, somebody said you had to. Okay, well, you're here. How can you make the best out of this situation, knowing that it is temporary? Once you're past your mandatory treatment, you are going to be able to make different choices. What is in your control right now, and how can you make the best out of this situation so 6 months from now, you are closer to having the happy, rich, and meaningful life that you want? The final type of pre-contemplator is called a resigned pre-contemplator. People in this category often feel hopeless about change and overwhelmed by all of the energy required. They are exhausted. And even thinking about change, it's just more than they can even wrap their heads around. You may have tried to recover before and relapsed. Okay, a lot of people have. So use your prior recovery attempts as learning experiences to identify strengths and strategies that worked in the past. That way you can start doing those again and maybe strengthen those tools and identify things that you did in the past that weren't helpful so you don't do those again. Spend some time thinking about all the times you have tried to change and been successful, even if it was only for a few hours. This is going to give you clues about what tools and motivations can work for you. In the next phase of change, people go into what's called contemplation or ambivalence. They've started to realize that there might be a problem and they're contemplating the need for change. Going back to our pool analogy, this is the person who realizes, you know what? I'm starting to feel a little bit hot, but I'm not quite ready to jump in that cold pool. That's too much. I'm starting to get uncomfortable, but I'm not ready quite yet to do anything. In contemplation, you're starting to feel distressed, but you may be overwhelmed by what you may have to do to recover, or unsure of what the next right step is. During contemplation, it's going to be important to get that sense of control and empowerment that, okay, there is something I can do to improve my situation. Take some time to write in your journal about ways you can increase your sense of commitment to this process, to recovery. Why are you committed? What can you do to increase your motivation? Write down those things that you're in control of and what you can do to feel empowered in this process. And identify potential problems that you think may occur. And instead of seeing them as barriers that you can't do anything about, see them as challenges or opportunities and figure out how you're going to solve this particular challenge in order to grow and get to the point where you're experiencing a rich and meaningful life. Some activities that you can do include finding exceptions, remembering that whatever you're not doing it 24/7, 365. There are little hiccups, little windows in there where you're not depressed, where you're not anxious, where you're not using, where you're not craving, where you're not in pain. Whatever your problems are, find exceptions. Identify 5 exceptions for every problem you have. If you have depression, anxiety, addiction, and fibromyalgia pain. Okay, so for all 4 of those things, identify 5 times in the past month when you haven't experienced those symptoms, even if just for half an hour or an hour, ideally for longer, but look for times when that hasn't happened. For example, a lot of people who have addictions, you can't engage in that addictive behavior and be exercising at the same time. You can't engage in that addictive behavior and be sleeping. I had one client who said, there was a hard line in the sand. I will not use in front of my children. So that was another exception. He started increasing the amount of time he spent around his kids. So he had, he knew he would not use in front of his children. So that was an exception to when he was using substances. Each one of these exceptions will give you ideas about tools that you can use, tools that you can build on in order to start helping yourself feel healthier, happier, and more empowered. The next phase is called preparation. So, okay, let's go back to that pool analogy. You're uncomfortable. You've decided you're starting to sweat. You're like, okay, I need to go get in the pool. Not quite ready to dive in yet because we all know how cold that pool feels when we've gotten a good sweat worked up. So you go over and you sit on the edge of the pool and maybe you dangle your feet in it just to get a feeling and see if it helps you cool off a little bit. Same sort of thing in preparation. You are getting ready to make a change. You're going to do it soon. You're just not quite ready to take the plunge. It's important during this phase to clarify goals and strategies for change. How are you going to do it? If you're sitting on the side of the pool, you may think, okay, well, I could gradually ease in, or I could just do a cannonball, or, however else you get in the pool. I don't know. But you're thinking about, my goal is to cool off so I feel better. So how can I make that happen? What are my options? Same thing in recovery. Your goal is to feel better. In order to make that happen, what options do you have available? What can you do? There's residential treatment, there's outpatient treatment, there's medication, there's exercise, there's nutrition. There's a lot of things out there. What options apply to you? And finally, examine your confidence that you're able to do it. I know I've sat on the side of the pool before thinking, you know what, I don't have the courage. I don't have the willingness to actually jump in the pool to cool off because I know how cold it's going to be. I don't have the confidence that I can actually do it. And that kept me hot and miserable. When you are getting ready to make a change, examine your confidence examine your motivation for making that change and increase your willingness. What are you willing to do? Maybe you're not willing to go to residential right now, but you're willing to make an appointment and at least start seeing somebody once a week in outpatient. Okay, well, that's a step. Or maybe you're not even willing to do that, but you're willing to try going to meetings. Okay, that's a step. A good activity for this phase of change to help you really get ready and get all your ducks in a row is to make a poster board collage of the positive aspects of recovery, the big picture. When you are no longer symptomatic, when you no longer are depressed or anxious or using, or your symptoms aren't there anymore. What's going to be different? What would life be like if you woke up tomorrow and were in recovery? Who would be there? What would you be doing? What's important? Give yourself something to visualize. If you want to think about it like the Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz, once you go down that yellow brick road, what awaits you at the end? Once you identify that, that is your final destination, okay? You're a ways away from there. What's the first thing you need to do, or the first thing that you're willing to do to start moving toward that destination? That's your next step. Another activity that you can do while you're in preparation is to write a letter to yourself with a future date and describe what life is like at that point. Such as, Dear Sam, I am so glad that you decided to make these changes, because now in the future, this is going on and you've had these successes and whatever you are hoping would happen. Give yourself hope, give yourself excitement and enthusiasm about all of the possibilities. The third possible activity, and you don't have to do all three of these, the third possible activity is to think of recovery like a trip. When you are going on vacation, there are a lot of things you need to do to prepare. You've got to make the hotel reservations. You've got to reserve the car. You've got to make the plane reservations if you're flying. You've got to pack. You've got to figure out what to pack. There's a lot of stuff you got to do. Write down the directions, what you need to do to get to your recovery destination. Think about, happiness and recovery as being a place. And what do you need to do to get there? Think about it like your Google Maps, and identify any obstacles, which on Google Maps would be like accidents or construction zones along the way that may make you detour. Because there are going to be detours along the way. You're going to get sick. Something could happen. It doesn't mean you have to relapse and go back home. It just means that you may have to take a little bit of a different path. Explore how you're going to manage all of the other facets of your life while on your trip. When you're in recovery, it's a full-time job. So how are you going to navigate your relationships, your work, your fitness? Who's going to walk the dog and pick up the mail while you're doing this? How are you going to incorporate recovery and everything that you need to do into your lifestyle? It's important to figure out how you're going to make it fit, because this is going to take some time and it's going to take energy. Finally, we're at the action phase. This is where you are, if you're at the pool, you're getting in the pool. You're tired of being hot and you're ready to start cooling off and feeling better. If you're thinking about it as a trip, you've got everything packed and you're ready to go. You've got your directions, you know how to get there. You are ready, willing, and able to make the change. Now it's going to be important to maintain your motivation. It can, while you're on that long drive, I know in Florida, going through Alligator Alley is what they called it, through the Everglades, it was just flat and nothing for, over 100 miles. And it got exhausting sometimes. It's important to maintain your motivation on your trip. When you get to those places where it feels flat and exhausting or too hard to keep going on, what is going to help you keep going? Identify in your journal 3 things that you need to do each and every day to maintain your motivation. 3 things that you're going to do each and every day. Write it down in your journal, but make a copy of it and send it to yourself or set it to send you a push notification every single day so you remember to do those 3 things. Some final thoughts. It's important in the recovery process to get to know and trust yourself. Recognize where you are in your readiness for change and figure out how you can rev up that momentum. If you're not quite ready to jump into the pool, how can you get yourself excited about it? Find 3 people you can count on to provide honest, constructive feedback. Sometimes it's hard to recognize where we are in our readiness for change, and our friends, our family, our peers can identify and notice and say, you know what, it seems like you're not near as motivated anymore. I've seen these changes in you. Or on the other hand, they can say, oh my gosh, I can't believe how energized and motivated you seem about change lately. That is awesome. Explore the pros and cons of each problem. Compare your perception of the problem to others' perceptions of the problem. If you had to describe your depression, if you had to describe your addiction, how would you describe it? And how would your mother describe it, or your best friend? And do they sound the same, or do they have a totally different perspective? Remember that change is a gradual process. The addiction helped you survive until you were able to start using other tools. During this preparation process, you identified some of those other tools that you want to learn how to use or start using again. It's important in this process to remember to focus on your strengths. Your weaknesses are there and you're going to address them, but it's important to make sure that you intentionally focus on your strengths every day.